The night does not end. Episode 8. The fire which God has put there. The meaning of Blood Meridian's epilogue. Section 1. They all move on again. After the novel proper has ended, McCarthy appends a short one-paragraph epilogue to Blood Meridian. Quote, "In the dawn there is a man progressing over the plain by means of holes which he is making in the ground. He uses an implement with two handles, and he chucks it into the hole, and he enkindles the stone in the hole, with his steel, hole by hole, striking the fire out of the rock which God has put there. On the plain behind him are the wanderers in search of bones, and those who do not search, and they move haltingly in the light like mechanisms whose movements are monitored with escapement and palate, so that they appear restrained by a prudence or reflectiveness which has no inner reality, and they cross in their progress one by one that track of holes that runs to the rim of the visible ground, and which seems less the pursuit of some continuance than the verification of a principle, a validation of sequence and causality, as if each round and perfect whole owed its existence to the one before it there on that prairie, upon which are the bones and the gatherers of bones and those who do not gather. He strikes fire in the hole and draws out his steel. Then they all move on again." End quote. Presumably the year is 1878, and the bone pickers that the kid encounters in the final chapter are still at work, gathering bison bones to sell to the eastern markets. These will be ground up and used as fertilizer. A man is walking among them, moving over this North Texas plain, making holes in the ground with an implement. McCarthy's language here is downright mystical. He even capitalizes God. And this epilogue has confused a number of readers, the esteemed literary critic Harold Bloom among them. Here is Mr. Bloom's take on this mysterious passage from his introduction to the modern library edition of Blood Meridian. Quote, "The strangest passage in Blood Meridian is set at dawn, where a nameless man progresses over a plain by means of holes that he makes in the rocky ground. Employing a two-handled implement, the man strikes the fire out of the rock which God has put there. Around the man are wanderers searching for bones, and he continues to strike fire in the holes, and then they move on. And that is all. Perhaps all that the reader can surmise with some certainty is that the man striking fire in the rock at dawn is an opposing figure in regard to the evening redness in the west. The judge never sleeps, and perhaps he will never die, but a new Prometheus may be rising to go up against him." End quote. Unlike Mr. Bloom, I don't have an Ivy League education, but I did grow up on a cattle ranch in rural Oklahoma, where I got a schooling that gave me greater insight into Blood Meridian's epilogue than 2 graduate degrees from Yale seem to have given the famed author of The Anxiety of Influence. The man progressing over the plain is digging holes for fence posts with a tool called a post hole digger. Growing up on my grandparents' ranch, I had the dubious honor of helping my grandfather build fences. I've helped dig post holes, drive posts in the ground, string barbed wire. This is tedious, back-breaking labor, and contrary to what ranchers will tell you, it doesn't build character. The only thing it builds are calluses and calcium deposits. If, unlike Mr. Bloom, you've done farm work, you know instantly what the nameless man in Blood Meridian's epilogue is doing with his implement. It's about as strange to you as a bale of hay. But if this character is simply building a fence, why is this action significant enough to warrant a coda? And what does it have to do with the carnage and chaos the reader has experienced in the 350 preceding pages? Section 2, Age of Wire and String. Barbed wire was invented in 1867 by Lucien B. Smith and then reinvented by Joseph F. Glidden in 1874. The barbed wire that ranchers use today is based on Glidden's patent. The history of barbed wire and barbed wire fences is the history of the end of the American West, the Old West, the Wild West. Whatever you want to call that decade after the Civil War ended in April of 1865 to the discovery of gold in the Black Hills by the Custer expedition. 1874 was also the year of Glidden's barbed wire patent. Before this, fences were expensive to build, and as cows required thousands and thousands of acres to graze, most cattle ranches weren't fenced. The lack of fences enabled both free grazing and those famed cattle drives where cowboys slow-walked hundreds of thousands of cattle up from Texas. If you walked them too quickly and didn't let them graze, the cows would be too skinny to bring a decent price by the time you reached the markets at Abilene, Kansas, and the other railheads on the Great Plains. Here in these cow towns, cattle could be loaded onto cars and shipped east to feed America's booming post-war population. The cow towns were notoriously violent. Violent men like Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok made a living and achieved great notoriety keeping the peace as marshals or sheriffs. It is worthwhile to recall that in Blood Meridian, Glanton and his men never strike a single fence. The hyper-violent gang moves just as freely as the bands of Apache they hunt, as unrestricted as the Comanche, lords of the plains. An unfenced West is an inconceivably violent place, but it's also a zone of extraordinary freedom, open to migrations of both the plains tribes and the animals they depended on for their way of life, the buffalo. With the invention and patenting of modern barbed wire, the West could be fenced off inexpensively, and it was fenced off almost overnight. By 1876, Custer was dead. Deadwood became a boom town, and Wild Bill was murdered there. The Comanches had been forced onto their reservation at Fort Sill. The Lakota chieftains Red Cloud and Spotted Tail led their people into the agency, surrendering. The braves who had killed Custer and decimated the 7th Cavalry would fight no more forever. The Wild West, that mythic period in American history that spawned countless films and novels and TV series, it lasted barely 10 years. Bloom's lack of practical farmhand knowledge causes him to miss the entire point to Blood Meridian's epilogue. The way of life practiced by Glanton's murderous gang has ended forever. The judge might say he'll never die, but the unrestricted, violent world we saw him moving through is disappearing in real time under his nimble feet. Judge Holden ends the novel dancing, making declarations of immortality. Is it possible we are witnessing his final dance?